Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call to order the May 11th, 2023 Audit and Finance Committee special call meeting.
For your mic guy.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Good afternoon. I'd like to call to order the May 11th, 2023 Audit and Finance Committee special called meeting. We have a quorum. It appears we do. Excellent. I'd like, I don't know. Yeah. I'd like to have a motion to call the meeting to order.
No, not to call to order, to adopt the agenda.
Oh, to adopt, yeah.
So move.
Second.
The agenda is approved as written. Oh, no, we need to vote. Can I have a vote?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes, and we will move forward to the first reading of item, first action on the agenda 2A, which is the first reading of the F-24 budget. Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you and good afternoon. Today we'll be presenting the district staff's recommended budget scenario, as well as 3 new budget scenarios that came from our committee of the whole meeting that was held on May 8th. One with a 4.8 millage increase, one with a 9.1 millage increase, and then one with no millage increase that was also requested. Next slide, please.
Excellent.
Uh-oh, can you back up one? Thank you. So the following priorities are included in 3 of the 4 budget scenarios that are being presented today. Increasing teacher pay, supporting principals' requests from the school data review sessions, and then the alignment of the student data clerk's responsibilities in their job descriptions. Next slide. Okay, so the proposed FY24 millage, on the operating side, we are proposing a 7.1 mil increase, which would be equivalent to $21.3 million. And so our millage rate would go from 130 to 137.1. On the debt service millage side, staff is recommending a decrease of 2 mils. And so our millage rate would go from 28 down to 26 for FY24, which would be a decrease in $10 million. So based upon PFM Group, their projections as of May 3rd, the debt service millage can be reduced by 2 mils without any issues. And this will result in a 2 mil decrease for owner-occupied properties. So in order to raise teacher salaries by $5,000 plus a step increase for all eligible staff, the net impact to taxpayers is approximately $11.3 million. And this debt service millage reduction would apply for both FY24 as well as FY25. So overall, this recommendation would reduce the debt service portion of all tax bills for all Charleston County taxpayers. And later in this presentation, there are examples that we will show the impact to taxpayers for these proposed millage changes. Next slide, please.
And Jacqueline, as we go through, Ms. Carlin, as we go through the presentation, would you prefer that we ask questions per page?
Yes, that would help me so I don't get lost in translation. Yes.
What I thought.
Thank you. I
Because it's
appreciate
pretty in depth. So if the committee understands that, we will stop and pause once Jacqueline has completed her presentation, and we'll ask our questions on each page.
Okay, thank you, sir. So although there's 4 scenarios on the screen right now, the first one we're going to go through is staff's recommended, which is we refer to as scenario 22. It includes a 7.1 mil increase. And for teachers, it includes a step plus a $5,000 salary increase across all salary cells on the salary schedule, going out to 40 steps. And it includes for non-teachers a step plus a 2.5% cost of living adjustment. So this particular scenario does in fact include the $2.2 million in additional revenues that we saw from the Senate version that was recently released. So our projected revenue number is 694 million. And then looking at our base expenditures, which comes from our January financial report, that's our starting point where we feel comfortable as our base for FY24 expenditures as far as our starting point is 651.9 million. So funds available for allocation are approximately 42.2 million. And so looking at the required increases, we included a teacher step that going out to 40 years for our current teachers, which is approximately 5.1 million. We also include, as stated earlier, the teacher salary increase of $5,000 for all teachers, including fringe, which is approximately 23.7 million. We also included a retirement increase for all of our current teachers, which is approximately 3 million. Health and dental increase, which is state mandated, that's approximately 1.3 million. And then the mandated H.3908 for paid parental leave, this would cover all of the subs when our teachers are taking this type of leave, is approximately 1.6 million. And then our charter school payments and our meeting street payments, we're projecting at this point $6 million. And then we have our operations line item for contractual obligations and other must dues, which is approximately 10.7. And we have a breakdown of these costs in an upcoming slide that we'll go through. So the total for the required increases is $51.4 million. So going down to the school data review recommendations, these numbers have not changed, but we're still basing this budget on a $6.8 million expenditure increase. And then for the learning services expansions, we're at 2.1 million. There again, we have a breakdown of all these costs on an upcoming slide.
And I think we should go to the upcoming slide and get to the bottom line so that when we discuss what we'll do for this page, we'll discuss both pages together because it'd be logical.
Okay, all right. And so the net position gain due to enrollment projections for FY24 is approximately $4 million. Next slide, please.
There's a big lag, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you for telling me.
I think it's the internet.
Okay.
Is it on this one on mine? Oh, there we go.
Okay, thank you, Maggie. And so staying with the first column for recommended, the other considerations that are included in this budget is the non-teacher cost of living adjustment of 2.5%, and then the non-teacher step increase and extending these steps out to 31. And those together are approximately 8.2 million. And this will keep this particular budget line item will keep this group of employees at 97% market value. And then we have an increase in insurance premiums that we're projecting at 1.2 million, and then increase in outsourced legal fees for approximately 600,000. So the other considerations total is a little over $10 million. So adding up all of those FY24 expenditure request additions, it's approximately 74.3 million. And remember on the prior page, we had talked about the projected additional funds that were available, which was 42.2 million. So the remaining needed to balance is just over 32 million. And the strategies to balance, these numbers have not changed, but for the mid-year spending freeze in April 2023 for non-salary accounts, which we've already done, is 2.7 million. The elimination of several departmental positions for next year is approximately 8.5 million. Non-salary budget reductions for FY24, we're projecting 7.5 million, and we're still working through those. The potential local revenue increase between the assessments we're using now and updated assessments we'll receive in the fall, we usually see a $3.5 million increase on that. And the use of fund balance for additional FY23 savings that we're projecting through year end is additional 5.3 million. And we are in this particular scenario asking to use fund balance for next year of approximately 4.7 million. And so the total strategies to balance comes down to 32.1 million, which is the remaining needed to balance for this particular scenario. Any questions before we go further on that?
I think it's critical before, ask if there are any questions from the committee or any board members that may be present. That we understand what we're here today doing, and basically that the committee, and the staff created this recommendation, and they're asking the committee to review it and make a recommendation on whether to move forward. And based upon our recommendation, that will allow staff to go back in, apply this as salaries, and what we're talking about is about 70% of the budget, and will allow the ability, probably for one of the first times, for staff to be able to give a more detailed budget to the board at the board first reading of the budget. You want to clear up something?
Yes,
Not at the first reading next week on
Yeah,
Monday,
we-
but next
we have-
Thursday.
yes, we have a slide
Mhm.
coming up about next steps. And when we have a decision today, we will be able to move forward and create what we call the first reading of the budget and have that delivered to all the board members by next Thursday, the 18th, May 18th.
And it's clear that this committee can only give a recommendation. It's really upon the board, once they have the budget, to make the decision what stays in, what goes forward. With that being said,
That is correct.
I will open the floor to any questions from the board, from the committee on the first two pages on 4 and 5 of what's been proposed.
I've got just a quick question. I'm curious on the staff increases, the 2.5% COLA and the step increase. You mentioned that keeps them at I think it was 97% of market. Do you have a sense of order of magnitude, what the delta is that it would take to get to market? So just as a reference point, because if it's hard to retain if you persistently pay below market.
Yes, Mr. Griffin, if we have those numbers, I can certainly look that up and make sure the committee has that information. I might just need a few minutes to do that.
Yeah, it seems like that's a data point that the full board should be cognizant of as well.
Okay.
Just in my opinion.
Any other questions?
Yeah, real quick, for the net positions gained due to enrollment changes, if we come in under what we are expecting for next year, would that obviously change us out for that number?
Where are you under strategies to balance?
Yeah, for net positions gained due to enrollment changes.
Oh, yes, thank you. Thanks, Lisa. Yes, that number could change based upon where enrollment lands. And we'll be able to provide, an update to this probably in September, October,
Right after the
Mhm.
90 days.
to see where we were in our projections. Yes, sir.
Right, and historically, over the last few years, we haven't been too off from our numbers with that.
I think we've been lower than we,
Haven't been too.
yeah.
It varies up and down.
Mhm.
Right.
School, but
Any other questions from the committee? Before I
I guess-
start chiming in.
I might have other questions, but I know we separately have materials that illustrate kind of the roll forward 3-year projection. And are we going to talk about that separately, or, because it's all wrapped together, right? So do we discuss the 3-year impacts now, or do we wait until are we going to discuss that separately?
Yeah, I think right now we're just talking on this proposed, the 5,000 across the board to all teachers, the COLA increase, the 7.1 millage increase, and how it has been represented along with how we anticipate to get to a balanced budget based upon those numbers. So we'll just stick pretty much to what's being proposed for the recommendation or to staff.
Right.
Yeah.
We
My
get
own-
to we'll get to the multi-year after we finish up with this one.
Yeah,
That's-
my only comment to that would be, I think it would be hard to approve this budget without considering the multi-year implications. I mean, it's hard to make a final determination or vote on this budget without looking at that 3-year projection. in tandem. I think that's part of the reason we have the 3-year projection, because some of the changes you make that we would approve or not approve as part of this budget have, trend effects that we need to be cognizant of before we make those decisions, I think.
True, I agree. So I wouldn't be calling for any, discussion as to approving this. I just want to make sure that we go through these line items and clarify exactly what these line items represent as the staff's proposed. And then obviously looking into what the 3-year, for instance, the unused balance, right here, they're showing 4,697,000. And later on in the presentation, when we do talk about the 3-year projections, we'll see how, that increases or does not increase. So, but I think right now it's just good to go through this line item as the staff has prepared, so we can clarify some issues.
Got it.
And I'll give you an example. In the strategies balance, we have a mid-year spending freeze starting in April of 2023. Yet in the school data review recommendations, we have an increase of almost 7 million. So I think it behooves us to have staff explain how we can have a firing freeze, and then at the same time, it looks like we're hiring an awful lot of staff. Ms. Carlin?
Yes. So the hiring freeze is only for central office staff. It's not impacting teachers and other positions in the classroom. And so just want to clarify that.
And Mr. Grabowski, if I could just add quickly that the items on are from the student data reviews, the SDRs are proposed for the coming school year versus here. So we have frozen, like Ms. Carlin said, all of our central staff positions, but anything that directly impacts student learning, we've allowed on a case-by-case basis to proceed from now to June 30th. And again, these positions would pick up for the new school year. Thanks for asking about them. And I think Bill has one more thing, Mr. Grabowski, if you don't
I have a
mind.
response for Mr. Griffin's question, if that's okay. So the cost to go to 100% of market for our non-teachers is another $6 million to the current budget ask. So that would be about $11 million total. So that's all of the non-teachers.
Got it. Thank you very much.
Certainly.
If there's not any other questions, I can talk about fund balance on the next slide, on slide 6.
What I would like to also do, since I specifically asked this and you complied, and that is to explain the scenario 26
Okay.
and what was taken out, so that if, we were to not have a millage increase, yet by state requirement, boost the salary of every teacher by $2,500. That is that next line, that next column. So if you could just explain what was taken out and how you got there, and what the difference was. Thank you.
Sure. So for scenario 26, that does not include a millage increase, but it includes a step plus a $2,500 increase for teachers across the board, every cell on the salary table, no incremental salary schedule, plus 40 steps. And so the funds available to allocate based upon not having a millage increase is approximately $20 million. And so that really limits what we can do. We have to cover the required increases, which was the teacher step, the teacher salary piece, the retirement, health and dental, paid parental leave, charter schools, and operations must dues. And that of course is approximately 39.5 million. But what we did have to do was remove all of the requests from the school data review recommendations, remove the learning services expansions. We did leave in the FY24 enrollment changes because we have to. And then we removed the non-teacher cost of living adjustment and step increase. We left in the insurance premium because that's a must do, that's a must payment. And the reason why it's under other considerations, because we don't know the exact dollar amount yet, but we know that it's something that we'll have to take care of. And then the increase in outsourced legal fees at 600,000. So we basically went from an expenditure request of 74.3 million, which is in the recommended column, down to 45.2 million to try to balance this budget without a millage increase. We were able to do it. The difference to balance was 25.5 million. And you can see in the strategies to balance, we pretty much use the same strategies as before with spending freezes, elimination of positions, non-salary budget reductions, things like that. But we were able to balance to this budget without a millage increase, but it did impact teachers. And then there would be nothing for non-teachers as far as salaries and increases.
Any questions from the committee on that model?
Hey, Keith, if I could ask, what between those two options, the elimination of departmental positions, why can we not pull money out of, apparently there's what, $2 million available in department positions that aren't needed theoretically between recommended and scenario 26. Why can we not pull that 2 million out and put it to non-teacher classroom positions?
We certainly could. We were just trying to hold on to our departmental positions if we could, if we had a surplus with this particular scenario.
So, but that's a surplus, but at the, I believe I heard you say that is at the expense of non-teacher positions. Is that correct?
Yes. With this particular scenario, with the no millage increase, we were trying to eliminate less positions and hold on to more staff at the central office staff or central office locations.
Understood. Thank you, Ms. Jackie.
Mm-hmm.
Any further questions on pages 4 and 5?
I'm sorry, one more quick clarification, Ms. Jackie. That $2 million, how many positions does that represent?
I don't have it broken out that way, but based upon what we've been looking at recently, the $8.5 million number is approximately 55 positions. It could be a little more, it could be a little less. That includes long-term vacancies as well.
Okay, and do we know how much it would cost in dollars to give the planned increase to non-teachers? The non-teacher classroom staff?
I'm sorry, could you state that again?
Yeah, so as I'm reading this, there's a $2 million that could be played with here. Do we know what the amount would be to give the requested raise to the non-teacher classroom staff? We were talking about the TAs and the other folks.
I don't have that number. broken
Well, I
down.
think if we look over the next column over to the column 1,
That's correct. Just move up to the left column of
yeah,
column 1. I think it's about $8 million.
yes. That's
Thank you.
still short. So we're still short.
Yes, sir. Which is why we took it out. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate you creating the model.
Mhm.
If there are no further questions on these pages, Ms. Carlin, move on.
So on slide 6, we'll go through the fund balance projections with the recommended 7.1 mil increase. So the first section is under fund balance projection is what we budgeted for FY23. We are budgeting to, excuse me, when we put together the budget for FY23, at that time, we had projected to use $18.8 million of fund balance. So we were going to end this year based upon budget with a fund balance of 140.2 million. But looking at the latest financial update from February, we are not going to use the $18.7 million that we had originally budgeted for. It's going to be closer to around 756,000. And that number may fluctuate as we get closer to year end and produce, or excuse me, produce more of the financial statements. So the impact of the FY 23 spending freeze is 2.7. We've already done that. And the impact of the potential additional FY 23 revenue and savings, which is around 5.3, it looks like we're going to be able to do that based upon our March update. So the projected fund balance at June 30th, 2023 is approximately $166.2 million. We do have a use of fund balance listed below for legal liabilities, the FY 23 spending freeze. We've already done it, but we're using that to balance the budget, as well as the FY 23 revenue and savings of 5.3. We're backing that out because we're going to use that to balance the FY 24 budget. And then the use of balance to completely balance the FY 24 budget at 4.7 million. So the projected fund balance as of June 30th, 2024 is going to be approximately 146.5 million. And so that number is highlighted in yellow. And because we wanted you to see that under the fund balance requirements section, we are able to maintain our fund balance requirement based upon our policy, which is to stay within or stay around 144.4 million. And then if I will, go ahead. Moving over to scenario 26, it's the same information. However, you'll see that the projected fund balance at June 30th, 2024, based upon this scenario, would be about 151.2 million. And then we would stay within our fund balance requirements, which would be around 142 million.
And just to clarify the fund balance, state requires us to keep 1 month of operating expenses in our fund balance, which is somewhere approximately about $70 million. So what we're looking at here is our internal policy, which is 2 months. And that's why the amount is, we're trying to keep up about 144 in that range, correct?
Right. And the reason why we do the 2 months is that is based on GFOA recommendations. And
Not
so,
state, but.
right.
Yeah, and I just wanted to make it clear again, once we receive the book next Thursday, around next Thursday, that way that's when we could find a way to, as a board, to try to save that 5.3 million, if we can. But I just wanted to make that clear again. Once we get that book that way, that's when we can go back in and try to reconcile things on our end that they weren't able to find.
But Ms. Carlin, I wonder if it would be helpful to perhaps add to the schedule the calculation that shows the current budget's projected expenses expressed in months, and that what this fund balance is relative to the target. Meaning, if our target is 2 months and this 144.2 million projection, maybe that represents 2.01 month or whatever the number is. So board members can hopefully quickly appreciate in relative terms, what does this fund balance mean? Because 145 million, obviously it's a lot of money, but when you compare it to what our target is, I think it would be helpful for folks to know, we're at 100%, 101% of target or 98% of target. Where are we relative to that target number? That would be my first recommendation. I also think it would be useful, and I don't know if we have the data, but I recall from the Moody's report that they indicated that our fund balance was low relative to the peer set that they consider for us. If they were able to provide us that, I think it would be helpful to also then show how our peer set compares on the same metric, meaning if we're at 2.01 months with a target of 2, and are our peers at 2.5 months or 3 months or something different. I don't know, but if that information is available, I think that would be important for the board to have.
Okay. Thank you, sir. No, that's a great idea.
Thanks.
And do we currently have a goal of what we would like our balance to be at? I know we are said we're going to do the 2, but do we actually have a stretch goal of what we would like it to be at, and a plan to try to get it there?
So the board has a fund balance policy, and it explains what the requirements are. And so what you see on this page here, in the first column, for example, the last number, the 144.4 million. That is the goal. That's the requirement. And so we don't have a goal that's beyond that. And so what we've been doing over the last couple of years, knowing that the ESSA funds are going to expire in September of 2024. In fact, there's a line item here for $22.8 million. It's for the stabilization for the ESSA fund. So that means that as we experience programs that were instituted from the ESSA dollars that are effective, not trying to replicate everything, but the ones that are effective. So for example, the influx of the allocation of additional dollars for mental health services. You know, we see effectiveness of that. That $14 million is funded through ESSA, that additional. So do we want to set aside money in the fund balance for October 2024 that we can continue that? So we do have a goal there for the ESSA, and also the requirements. We specifically land on what the requirements are.
Okay. There's no other questions. We can go to the next slide.
So, but to go back to, I think one of the previous slides, when we looked at budgeted, we had budgeted for this year to use almost $18,000 of the, I mean, 18 million. And we ended up using less than $1 million. So historically speaking, when we talk about prior budgets and using part of this fund, we've been pretty good at it.
We have.
I think it also needs to be clarified, and I know we've clarified it, and I don't think you can clarify it enough exactly what this fund consists of, because everybody thinks it's cash sitting in a bank account, which is not.
Right.
You just want to give me an overview?
Of what fund balance is compared to a general checking account. So fund balance comes from, it's a financial statement clarification. It's basically all of your revenues minus your expenditures, and then transfers coming in and out, whether it's revenue transfers coming in or expenditure transfers coming out. So when your revenues exceed your expenditures, you build your fund balance. And so a lot of people seem to think that the fund balance is the same as like your checking account, and it's not. You know, we have a lot more in our checking accounts when you consolidate them all together. We have a lot more in our checking accounts than we do our fund balance when you consolidate all of those together. And so there's been a lot of interest in fund balance over the last several months. And so I'm actually working on a scenario where I wanted to show not Audit and Finance Committee as well as the board that even though our fund balance looks really strong on June 30th, it drops really scary low around March and April. And so, excuse me, I'm sorry, around, hang on, around October, November, and December, until we start getting the bulk of our local tax revenues coming in. So I've started looking at that, but I'm not really ready to present it and talk about it yet. And so
Excellent.
hopefully I'll have something to you in the next week.
Any further questions? Moving on.
Okay. All right, so this is our list of the contractual obligations and must-dos on the operations side. And so for transportation, you can see we've got a contract increase to factor in, as well as additional bus purchases. And then Mr. Burrow, he's really good about showing where he's reducing his budget. And so the overall transportation increase is about $716,000. And then on the security side, we've got some personnel adds. We've got a radio fees. We've got some off-duty staffing at early college. And a new program for them this year is a school crossing guard area. And then all of the equipment and computer and fees that go along with that, as well as additional vehicle costs. So for the security, it's going to be a little over 2.1 million. And these are must-dos, okay? School nursing, they're wanting to add an additional 7 positions, it looks like, to our schools, as well as a nurse liaison to handle the vaccination program, and then additional fuel costs for their new vaccination van. And so the total nursing is about $846,000.
Hey, Jackie, if I could comment real quick on that one, just to clarify, the nursing is a move from ESSER, not an additional nurses. So it's funding with GOF and not ESSER, as we try to migrate away from ESSER funding.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yes, ma'am.
And then the maintenance section, we've got one of the things we always talk about is our utility rate increases. And then they take in consideration the square footage increase as we, grow as a district, the increase in custodial and grounds contracts, and then increased funding for all schools across the district for event works. And then an increase for contracted delivery drivers. And so the maintenance increase is approximately $7 million. And then the last line is athletics, and that's an increase in wages for our police officers that secure our games. So the total operations, contractual obligations and must do is $10,661,000, which is the number you've been seeing on all of our different scenarios.
Any questions with the committee on this page? Page 7.
Yep, for the nurses being moved over, is that part of the ESSER stabilization, the 22 million? Or is that pulled out?
No, we weren't going to use that particular piece. We were going to absorb that in general operating fund and not use that funding for this. Any other questions on this one? No.
We move forward.
Okay. All right. So our learning services expansion list. We have an increased cost due to the staffing for the constituent board meetings, which is about 60,000. And then multilingual services involves a parent advocate as well as assistant principal on special assignment, which is about 250,000. And then school support, dealing mostly with truancy and hearing, 371,000. And then our child development program and adding CERDEP teachers and teacher assistants, we always match those two together, is approximately $1.2 million. And then translation and interpretation services and 3 additional bilingual secretaries is 303,000.
And those bilingual secretaries would be at Calhoun, or they distributed throughout?
As in Pacific schools.
Excellent. The increase in the constituent board meeting staff.
Needed. Absolutely needed.
Darren, can you?
I think that's absolutely needed.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so if there's no
Great.
other questions, we'll move.
Any further questions from the board on what's been presented so far?
No.
Mr. Kabrowski, I'm just logging on, so I'm playing catch up. So I'll wait until I hear the next lines.
Yeah. So the benefit, so any costs you see on here, you got it, okay. Yes, ma'am. Which benefits what, 35% of our salaries plus health and dental, yeah.
So on to the multi-year budget.
Yes. Maggie's going to pull that up for us on the screen. Okay, so I'm going to start. So this is our multi-year budget for scenario 22 that we've been talking about as our recommendation. So looking at the left side, this is the same layout as you'll see on our monthly financial update. So this is probably very familiar to you with projected revenues, and then the different types of revenues are broken out, and then projected expenditures, and then the different types of expenditures are broken out. And so what we wanted to show here is historically what our revenues and expenditures are going from fiscal year 2018 up to fiscal year 2022. And we also did, if you'll notice the columns in blue, we did an average from FY19 to 22, just to give you an idea of the average of all these different line items, whether it's revenues or expenditures. And then we also, on the last item that's blue, we did an average annual percent change from FY19 to FY22. So that kind of gives you an idea of the percentage increases that we see, whether you're looking at revenues or expenditures. So the next column over is the FY23 budget that was board approved. You'll probably recognize these numbers from our monthly financial statements. And then the next column in yellow is our projected at year end, and this is as of February. These numbers tie back to our February financial update. And then the next column, you'll see a variance between the FY23 budget and what we're projecting to end at year end. And then you see the percent change. And so projected FY24 for this particular scenario, it includes a 7.1 mil increase for local taxes, and it includes the Senate version on our state revenues. And this information is depicted below under the revenue notes. And then it also includes all the expenditures that we've been talking about for this particular scenario. And that's also indicated below in our expenditure notes. So looking at the FY 2024 column, we are projecting total revenues to come in around 697.6 million. And then taking consideration all the different expenditure requests that we've gone over multiple times, the total projected expenditure is going to be around 710.3 million. And so we're going to use approximately $12.7 million in fund balance to balance this budget. And that number comes from the strategies to balance. Remember, we had the 4.7 million, which was our very last number, the 5.3, which is what we're planning to save for FY23, and then the additional 2.7 that we did for the spending freeze that we've already done. So that's where the $12.7 million number comes into play. And so by using fund balance, we do have a balanced budget of expenditures and revenues at 697.6 million. So going over to FY25 and projecting a 3% growth on all of the local tax assessments, and also taking in consideration a 3.3 mil increase. We're looking at total projected revenues around 725.7 million. And then on the expenditure side, taking in consideration a teacher and non-teacher salary increase of a step plus a 2% COLA, just to give us a starting point of what we could do. And then taking in consideration all the expenditures that we're adding to the budget this year, we're looking at a total projected expenditure of approximately 726.7 million. And so there's a new line on this multi-year in the projected expenditure section. It's towards the bottom and it's called average expenditure variance. And it's only on the far right-hand column and it's $11.6 million. It's a negative number. And we'll talk about what that represents in an upcoming slide. And basically, we're going to show you that over the last 5 or 6 years, and not including the year we had COVID, that what we've budgeted for, we've not spent. And so that's where that number is coming into play. And so looking at the revenues over expenditures, we may need to use approximately $991,000 either in fund balance or find a way to reduce expenditures by that amount. I know this was a lot of information to go over at one time, so do you have any questions, concerns?
Any questions from the committee on these 2 pages on the working draft?
I think I follow it. I think, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, you know, historically, we have had this expenditure variance that you've dropped into the 25 projection. And it has been a way that we have mitigated anything that might have come up during the course of the year. But I think including this guesstimate, and I understand it's a reasonable approach as there could be to that estimate. I guess it exposes us a little bit to whatever the vagaries of whatever variances might be. And so it just makes our projecting a little more precarious. Is that a fair observation?
Okay, yes, sir. We hear you, Mr. Griffin, and maybe showing the next slide as we talk through it will better explain why, our thinking on this. If there's no
So,
other
yeah,
questions.
just as long as we can come back to these two. Okay, I agree. So we'll take it in as 3.
Okay. So the history of expenditures, this is comparing our budgeted expenditures to actual going back to FY17. And as you can tell, or as you can see, we are not spending what we are requesting to budget, or what our budget requests are. We included FY20 in this data, but we excluded it from the average, and with the intent to show that over a 5-year average, we have a variance of about $17.5 million that we're not spending, that we're asking for in our budgets. And so we took a two-thirds of the 5-year average to come up with the 11.6 million that we put in the budget. We just felt like it was still less than the lowest variance reported in these numbers. And the reality is we can clearly show that we're not spending what we're budgeting. And we just want to be very transparent about that. We see it and we're trying to get our arms around it.
So I think it's a very reasonable approach and reasonable to include it. Just structurally, I just think we should be cognizant of the potential risk we have where we have unfilled positions, which are a large part, if I recall correctly, are a large part of what drives this variance. So if we have unfilled positions in the classroom or with the non-teacher staff, because our compensation level is below our peers, then that leads us to that's how we're filling the budget. So in some sense, you don't really want to have these unfilled positions. And so if we ever got to actually being sort of quote unquote fully staffed, which I know is not, there's always going to be frictional turnover, but if we ever got to fully staffed, then we would suddenly not have the benefit of this in our budget.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Griffin, I could not have said that any better. Thank you for recognizing that. When I saw this slide in the presentation, it was very concerning to me.
I would say that, so in the FY24 column, that's a budget. So the FY25 is not a budget, it's a projection, and it's based on so this analysis that you see here is only one analysis. So we take a look at the fill rate that we have for positions. And so we've gone back several years, take a look at a number of factors to come up with a set of assumptions based on the history. And so it's a reasonable projection, but again, it is a projection and not a budget. So there will be variance between when we get to the 25 budget to this projection based on actuals.
Because I am a little concerned on your projected FY 2025 showing the new line, the average expenditure variance of 11 million as it applies, because it seems like that 11 million makes a significant impact on the expected expenditures to the use of fund balance. Because if we were to give the 7.1 and everything in that scenario model, as I see projected, if you take that 11 out, we will be using more of the unused funds going forward, which means the next year, we could be faced with a different scenario if the variances are off.
So true. So that would be one scenario that you'd be faced with more expenditures than you have revenue. Another scenario, which might be more reflective of the history, is that you have a major infusion of additional money going into fund balance. So that's been our history the last 5-6 years. It shows by year, and we've excluded in this analysis the year of FY20 because we had far less expenditures because of the first year of the pandemic. And so the average over those number of years, the 5-year average, is $11.5 million that we've added to the fund balance. So we've taken 2/3 of that as opposed to using the full average of $17.5 million. We reduced that by 1/3 as a factor to guard against what you just said, Mr. Grabowski. But again, these numbers for the FY25 column, those are projections, and so the actuals will come out, wherever the actuals are.
And I'm curious on Ms. Carlin, you mentioned a 3.3 mil increase, millage increase. In what year is that anticipated?
25, and that's just based upon historically what we've increased on our millage rates.
And historically, we have increased our millage rates every year.
Not at the maximum allowable, but yes, sir.
Right. And the maximum allowable this year, as stated by the legislator, is
A little over 14.
So we have a maximum of 14.5, I think, that we could. And so the recommendation from staff here is use a little less than half of that, 7.1 versus the 14.5 maximum.
so with the numbers that we're being presented with, we're already anticipating a millage increase, possible millage increase in 2024 or 24-25. And then it's closer to what the historical number has been in the past years.
Yes, sir.
I'm curious, I see a radical drop in federal funding. Is it something that is something that the district can help increase? I mean, I'm trying to understand how we had such a drop down to almost nothing. As I see it, federal sources. And in 2018, we had, and I know it's only $388,000, but we're down to 95,000.
So that's mostly made up of impact aid and money that we get from FEMA when we have.
Got it.
So it's directly impacted by what's going on around us. Correct. Correct.
So we want the number to be 0. And I look up at the expenditures in the budget, as you presented in that slide. How much of ESSER is included in the 21, 22, 23 budgets? None. So we pretty much have accounted for that. We know that by 2024, everything, we're only looking to absorb what, $22 million to keep, is that the rough number?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Moving forward, keeping some of the successful programs that ESSER has been,
So yeah.
stabilization, yeah.
So that's just preparing for the future, and we've been able to set that aside.
Any further questions from the committee or board members present? And knowing that the interest rates keep going up, how are we accounting for the debt expenditure increases on the short-term notes? How does that affect our general operating fund?
It doesn't. The debt service has its own fund, which we're going to talk about that a little bit later in this presentation.
Great.
It's not part of general operating fund, but no, I do understand your concern. And it's something that our PFM group, who they are our financial advisors, they're always looking at that.
So as we stand now, projecting going forward to the end of the fiscal year, we're not going to be increasing this year the use of fund balance
On the general operating side,
on the general operating side.
there's a couple
Thank you.
things that we're waiting on before I can sincerely answer that. One, I have to see the final 135-day membership numbers because that impacts a few things, like our charter school payments and our Meeting Street Academy payments. I'm waiting to see the final TIF reductions that come off of our local tax revenues. And I'm also looking to see the economic rebates that come off of our local tax revenues. So there's three things that could sway that answer to your question that I'm looking to see now. And that information will come about on our April as well as our May financial update. There might be a few little things that change on June, but usually by April and May, we have a good idea of where we're going to end the year, especially with revenues and those charter school payments. You want to add?
Any other questions? We will move on, Ms. Carlin.
Thank you. And so the next slide, this is just a repeat of the other slide, so we didn't have to go back and forth in our presentation. So we've already covered scenario 22 and 26. And so scenario 24 includes a 4.8 mil increase with a teacher step plus $2,500 increase across all 40 steps. And then a non-teacher step increase and a 2.5% COLA. And so with the 4.8 mil increase, the available funds for allocation is 35 million. And then under required increases, the only thing that changes, no, it doesn't even change. I'm sorry. The teacher salary increase stays the same at the 2,500. And so when you keep going down, the school data review recommendations, those are left in this particular scenario, as well as the learning services expansions and the enrollment changes based upon the FY24 enrollment projections. And the other considerations page, or excuse me, section, that stays in play with the $10 million. So the total 24 expenditure request is a total of 62.5 million. And the projected funds available, as we discussed earlier, is 35 million. That's the revenues available. So the remaining needed to balance is 27.4 million. And we use the same strategies as we've been using below to balance this budget. And then scenario 25 includes a 9.1 mil increase. This actually takes the teacher's step plus $5,000 per $5,000 increase per teacher up to 40 steps. And then the non-teachers include this scenario includes a step plus the 2.5% cost of living adjustment. So the revenues go to $700.4 million minus the same base expenditures we've been using. So the funds available for allocation on this particular scenario are 48.4 million. And so going down to required increases, everything stays the same except for, of course, the teacher salary increase. So you can see going from $2,500 to $5,000. The total for doing the 5,000 is 23.7 million. And we left in the school data review recommendations as well as the learning services expansions and the enrollment projections And we also left in all the other considerations, which is the $10 million. So the total 24 expenditure request addition for this particular scenario is about 74.3 million. And the remaining needed to balance is 25.8 million. And then we were able to use the same strategies to balance on this to have a balanced budget. Should I pause before I go to fund balance? I don't want to get too far ahead.
Do any questions at this point from the committee or board members in attendance?
Okay. All right, we'll just skip over the fund balance for those other two. As you can see, we can cover our requirements, so. All right, so the next slide. Next one. Next one. There we go. Okay, so I'll turn it over to Mr. Brigman, our Chief of Human Resources.
Thank you, Jackie. So I have a couple of slides in reference to talking about teacher compensation. This particular slide is specifically about recommendations or some of the findings from the Teacher Compensation Task Force. And that particular group is made up of our educators, mostly classroom teachers, some of the HR certified staff, as well as some principals. And in looking at what it's really costing and what may be impacting some of our teachers from being and continuing in the Charleston area has really been the cost of housing. Today, there was an article that was released from the National Council of Teacher Quality. It's a national research actually on this very topic, that from a labor market standpoint, there were many districts that, because teachers cannot afford to live in their school district, they are seeing recruitment and even, of course, retention issues. So this particular slide, again, talks about housing. It gets into the affordable housing and what's considered affordable housing, that 30% of your income would be set aside or would be spent monthly for gross housing costs, which includes utilities. Craig Logan from the Chamber of Commerce has been on our committee as well. Mr. Logan is working with the Chamber of Commerce on the cost of housing in the Tri-County area. So he assisted us with looking at cost in Charleston. You can see the average one-bedroom apartment, the rent is about $1947 on average. And this is not Mount Pleasant. This is not just downtown Charleston. This is the whole Charleston area, whether it's West Ashley, North Charleston, but the entire Charleston community. Home prices, we've all seen these escalate over the last couple of years. $505,000 is the average cost of a home in Charleston. So the next part of the slide is showing the cost of rent for that $1,947 a month apartment, which is annually $23,000. And you can see also the cost of a mortgage annually for a $505,000 home. And if you look at the $23,364 annually to rent, we also note the gross annual salary of $77,880 in order to afford that, as well as for the mortgage down below, the $128,360 for someone to afford that mortgage. So I'm going to keep going. If there is a question, please stop me. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So this is also part of what the group worked on, is looking at our current teacher salary and then the cost of living. So this shows a first-year teacher in our system right now. When we say first-year teacher, that teacher is a step 0. This is a bachelor's degree, because our pay structure pays for a bachelor's all the way up to a PhD. And we talked about that starting salary before, $43,146. The net per month is about $2,400. And then you can see estimated expenses that we think that the committee thought that a young professional, may have monthly. So sharing a 2-bedroom apartment, their portion of the rent, $1,000. A used car and insurance, $520. And I won't go through all of it. You can just see at the end of the month, they're short about $155. And kind of a chuckle here is one of the recruiters who works with me, basically, when we were looking at this, said, well, I can't afford to get my hair done, which I thought, yeah, you might be in that particular situation, because when you look at it, do you have money for emergencies or other expenses? Then we look at the $5,000 increase that's been recommended in one of the scenarios. So 5,000 per cell, and our first year teacher salary would move to 48,146. And again, going through these expenditures, you would see at the end of the month, there is something left. It's not as much as we'd like for, but there is something left. So really just wanted to give kind of a sample of what this looks like. We are hearing from a lot of our principals, most recently in the Mount Pleasant area, that our young, inexperienced teachers cannot afford to live in Mount Pleasant. So they are trying to commute in from other areas, and the commute has been quite a challenge. So moving on to the next slide. So this is a comparison of other districts, our neighbors, of our first year teacher for 2023 at step 0, and then the different degrees: bachelor's degree, bachelor's 18, master's plus 30, and doctorate. This is all driven by the salary structure that the state establishes. So the state recognizes these degree levels, and then also the state goes to step 23 as their max step. And thankfully to the board, we're now at step 40, which is huge for our teachers. But going back to the slide, you can see what Charleston is paying the bachelor 0 at 43.1, Dorchester 2 slightly lower at 41, and then Berkeley not too far behind us, and then you see the local average. So I won't read all of those, but if you go down to the next area of the slide, you'll see we start comparing to Atlanta, Beaufort, Charlotte, Mecklenburg, Greenville, Jacksonville, Horry County, and then Raleigh. I will note that on the Beaufort first year teacher salary schedule, and I don't have all of the details, but I believe there's true starting salaries at 50,000. They were using some additional funds, but I think it's built in as a supplement. And then I know my friends in Greenville County School District, and you'll note that under number 3, they give 4 supplemental days to their first year teacher of their daily rate to come for some PD and time to get their classrooms ready for this as they go into their new career for August. And they also do that for their second year teachers, which would actually be your step 1. They give them 2 days. So the next slide, I think Jackie's going to talk about from a finance standpoint, and then I'll come back and in the teacher part.
Thank you. So I know we've seen this.
Before we move on, any questions from the committee at this point?
This is Kent. I've got a question or a comment that the cost, I very much appreciate the cost of living comparison, or the salary comparisons to our competing markets like Jacksonville and Charlotte and like. My concern is that the cost of living in most of while if you look at our peer average, for example, it shows our peer average of 45 and versus us at 42, just at the bachelor level. But that doesn't consider the cost of living differential in those other cities. And I did my own work, and somebody else could do their own to validate it in a different way. But at least in this simple data I was looking at, we have a 20+ percent higher cost of living than even that peer set, which I think, at least I at first presumed that Atlanta and Charlotte and those places would have a much higher cost of living than Charleston, and the opposite was true. And so I don't know if you have data that would be useful to share with the committee on this, like if there was a way to cost of living adjust these, because yeah.
We do have that information, and the article I referenced does not talk about Charleston, but the team is looking at using some of the data and pulling the Charleston data. What I will say also, and back years ago when we had our salary study for all positions, including teachers, and it was based on market data. When teachers across the nation are underpaid to begin with, this has been an ongoing issue for decades. it's very hard to get market data. So definitely that cost of living, cost of housing. And the other part I would comment on, I've been on some statewide committees recently, and Charleston is just so unique because of the cost of housing for us. I mean, Greenville may be competitive, but Greenville is not as expensive to live in as Charleston. So it makes us very unique for the state.
Because I'm stating the obvious, and I think you're attuned to this because I've seen this in other organizations where, oh, this, I'm really interested in moving to Charleston for XYZ job. And this base pay is comparable to what this person makes somewhere else, but then they go do the math on the cost of living there. Oh, I can't afford to do it. And so I think that cost of living data is important to include with this.
We will certainly see what we can present to the group. Thank you.
And I appreciate how you broke down the expenses. Obviously we're focusing on our first year teachers. Having spent some time over the last couple of weeks talking to principals on this issue, especially in Mount Pleasant, I think one of the bigger issues that we have to realize and remember is the families, the teachers that have 1, 2, children right now, single moms that are already in the system working with us, whether they've got 8 years, 5 years, 15 years, it's been the childcare. And I think that was the big one that just came back. Teachers leaving mainly nothing other than just the expense of childcare. So I appreciate that we're focusing on, the first year's starting salaries, but I do think, we have to take into account these teachers that have been with us for, some years and what they're faced with at the same time.
Okay. So we've presented this chart before, but we added a column. We wanted to show our average teacher salary increase compared to the annual CPI increase. And so when you look at 2019, 20, and 21, you'll see that the average teacher salary increase was over 5%. And the reason for that was because that's when the district and the board made a commitment to a 3-year implementation plan to bring the teacher starting salary to $40,000. And then after that, we typically did a 3.8, a 3.6 increase, 5.2. And this year, if looking at the proposed step plus 5,000, it's about a 9.8% increase, average increase. It varies. And so what I wanted to point out is that, not only does our district pay above the state teacher salary schedule, but our salary increases are above the annual consumer price index. And we never really showed it this way. So I just it was recommended by one of our audit and finance committee members. And I thought it was a great idea. So we wanted to add this in to show that. I don't think anyone realizes that.
I will add, based on what I heard from Mr. Griffith a few minutes ago, though this CPI, I believe, is probably if not a statewide, national average. And so I'm assuming, and you guys can confirm, and if so, it does not address what Mr. Griffith just mentioned about the variance in cost of living between different geographical areas. So, you can go to a website and say, if I make $75,000 in this city, what does it cost? What does it cost me in Atlanta? What equivalent salary do I need in Atlanta or Jacksonville? And as been pointed out, you would see in a lot of cases like that in the Southeast that Charleston would take a greater salary. So.
Any questions on this slide?
Any further questions on this slide? And we'll move on.
Thank you.
Okay, this particular slide on teacher salaries is a slide that Jackie's team put together, but I think I probably am the best person to speak to it with the different steps as well as education. So the first grouping on the left where it says proposed increase, and this is based on the idea of $5,000 increase across the entire schedule up to step 40. And Mr. Grabowski, this may help when we talk about how is this impacting the more experienced teachers. And again, thankful to the board that we went to step 40 because that is impacting our most experienced teachers. And I have had probably 6 sessions in the last couple of weeks with our experienced teachers talking about that. And thank you. They've been very appreciative. But in looking at this very first top left, this is a current teacher on the left, the bachelor step 0, currently making 43,146. The idea is when you see step 0 to 1, is this first year teacher who's step 0 will step now to step 1. And so this teacher at the bachelor's step 0, who will now be a step 1, when you look over towards the right for FY24, the salary would be 49,000. And so for each education level below, if it was a master's step 0, they step, so 48,193 steps to 54. Are you all following? It's a lot of, so you can see on those various scenarios, the next one is the person at step 5 going to step 6. If you note towards the bottom on the left is a step 15 to a step 16. So that particular bachelor's degree is currently at 57,191 and would step to 63 for next year by stepping to step 16. And then getting into some of our more experienced staff, on the right-hand side, you would see the step 25, which would move to step 26. So you see the bachelor step 25 at 67.2 and would step to 73,242. A doctorate at that particular experience level would from 87.1 to 93.5. And then our group at the bottom there is our 35 to 36 group. So this is a scenario of 5,000 across the schedule, as well as a step for all teachers up to step 40. And just a reminder, again, the state only requires districts to step 23. So we were at step 26 2 years ago, then step 30 for the current year, and then adjusted this year to step 40. And I'll open up any questions.
I hate to go back a slide, but if you could go back to the prior slide, on 2019, 2020, that was a multi-year split. So it was something that was agreed on 1 year, and then it was automatically agreed we were going to have another increase on the second year.
Yes, sir. I think with HR and Don was the CFO at the time, we built out a 3-year plan to get at the time to a starting salary of 40. And I always want to be really careful. And teachers ask me this a lot when I say this, it's a starting salary of 40, or I call it like the 40 schedule or the 50K schedule. They sometimes think that only means for the first year teacher, but it's for all teachers that step or benefit from the schedule, just to clarify.
So from 2018, it's not just been the starting salaries that we've been increasing. It's all the way up, all the step ladder.
Well, it's been an ongoing conversation, I would say, about teacher compensation. It's so every year we're having this conversation because we need to increase the pay, and you're seeing that at the state level as well. I think the goal is, I think by 2025 is to be at 50 grand for starting across the state.
And when you say there's a goal, that's a state goal or a district goal?
That's a state goal.
State goal.
I would add to that, though, if I may, is the state goal, but the state has not stated that they will fund 100% of that. So historically and currently, the state requirements for teacher salary increases for Charleston, the funding from the state has not covered that. So although the state may very well go to 50,000, I would not anticipate, at least based on the history, that they would fund 100% of that for Charleston to be far less than 100%. And so if we were able to, let's say 2025, so if we were able to, if that's what the state mandate is, and that's 2 years out, 2 budget years out, actually 1 budget year out.
1 year out.
That's right. And then so if we locally here, if we're able to get to close to that, say 48,000 this year, then that's going to be less of a jump for us financially in in fiscal year 25, if the state mandates that.
I'm sorry to proceed back, just I appreciate the input on the stakeholder. Any questions from the committee on page 18 of the presentation? Ms. Carlin, go on.
Thank you. So we always like to present the impact to taxpayer when we're talking about millage rate increases. And so this one, this particular slide is looking at an owner occupied home at an assessed home value of $435,000. And so we've already gone over this before, but we'll go through it again. So to do a 7.1 mil increase, and then on the operating side, and a 2 mil decrease on the debt service side, this particular taxpayer impact would be a negative $35. And the reason being is because keep in mind, owner occupied homes do not pay taxes on the operating millage for school districts based upon Act 388. And so the next box over shows a potential 4.8 mil increase, and then the 2 mil decrease on debt service. So there again, it would still be a negative $35. Because the only thing that's being impacted is the debt service piece, which they pay on that. And then the same thing for the 9.1 mil increase and the 2 mil decrease. It would still be the same amount, $34.80. So what we're trying to state here is that this wouldn't impact owner occupied homeowners. So the next slide is for non-owner occupied homes like rentals, second homes, things like that, where the assessed home value is $435,000. So for the 7.1 mil increase on the general side, and then the 2 mil decrease on the debt service, the impact to taxpayer would be approximately $133. And then going over to the next box, doing a 4.8 mil on the general, along with the 2 mil decrease on the debt, the impact to the taxpayer would be approximately $73. And then moving over to the next box, doing a 9.1 mil on the general side and a 2 mil decrease on the debt service side, the impact to the taxpayer would be approximately $185.
That's for the whole year, right? Just to clarify.
Yes. The question was that would be for the whole year. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Timble.
And then the next slide, where we talk about commercial real property with an assessed value of $1,675,000 to do a 7.1 mil increase with a 2 mil decrease on the debt side. The impact to taxpayer would be approximately $513. To do the 4.8 mil increase on the GOF side, and then the 2 mil decrease on the debt service side, the impact would be approximately $282. And then doing the 9.1 mil with the 2.0 mil decrease, the impact to taxpayer would be approximately $714. And so on the automobile with an assessed value of $20,000, the 7.1 increase with the decrease would be about $6. The 4.8 mil increase with the 2 mil decrease would be approximately $3.36. And then the 9.1 with the 2 mil decrease would be approximately $9 impact to taxpayer. And then lastly, for personal property with an assessed value of $10,000, the 7.1 with the 2 mil decrease would be approximately $5. And then the 4.8 with the 4.8 mil increase with the 2 mil decrease would be about $3. And then lastly, the 9.1 mil with a 2 mil decrease would be approximately $7.46. Any questions on any of that? Okay. So next slide, please, Maggie.
I'm sorry, any questions from the committee? We can move on, Ms. Carlin.
All right. So as a recap, as you know, we're recommending this, the staff is recommending the scenario 22, which involves a 7.1 mil increase. We're raising the teacher salary to $5,000 plus a step all the way out to 40 steps. And then also for non-teachers doing a step plus a 2.5% COLA. And the reason why we're recommending this particular scenario is it captures all of the required increases that we need to cover. It captures all the principal requests that were communicated to us throughout the school data review sessions. It captures the learning services expansions that to support the multilingual services, truancy, child development, and translation services. It also captures the FY24 enrollment projections that's going to impact classrooms. And it captures the other considerations, which HR has recommended to keep the non-teaching group, this particular group of employees at 97% market value. And we've been able to balance this budget with the strategies that we've talked about on multiple occasions. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. When you take in consideration the 7.1 mil increase and then the 2 mil decrease, the 7.1 mil increase on the operating side and the 2 mil decrease on the debt service side, the impact is approximately, it's just a little over $11 million to the taxpayers in order to give this raise to our teachers and do all the other things that we're asking to do in this particular budget scenario.
Do I have any questions from the committee on the final roundup on the budget? And just so that I can understand where we're going to be going further in the presentation before we move on, the next topic we'll be discussing will be the debt service.
Yes, because the last time we presented debt service, we were staying at the 28 mil. And so we need to make sure that it's communicated that we are looking to reduce this and get approval from Audit and Finance Committee and have it move forward to the board for their approval.
So are you seeking two motions from us? I mean, two recommendations from us today?
No.
I think it's one
No, it's all
on
part of the first reading.
all part of the first reading.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes.
So we'll hold off two parts. Dr. Carroll, Temple, do you have any questions? If you could proceed to the podium, please, so we can all hear your voice.
Well, the question I have, and maybe you all can tell me when this is going to happen. We're talking about some significant cuts to our budget. So when you talk about $8 million in departmental positions, having worked in the district, I really have a question like, what does that really mean? What does that mean to our academic programs, our instructional programs? What does that mean to our schools? What does it mean to the support services that we provide the schools? And that's when I want to know, what is that discussion? Because I am 100% for our teacher pay, but I'm also 100% that we have the organizational structure in place to support our teachers, our students, and our schools. And that's what I'm worried about. And that's what's unclear to me.
That makes sense, Dr. Temple. So here's the process. What we need for this afternoon is for the committee to move forward to the school board for the 22nd, a recommendation for first reading of the budget. So the first reading of the budget does not lock the board in to the budget. But in order for the type of analysis that you're looking at and to be able to provide more details than what you have in front of you today to the board, then we need to select a position so that the staff, the finance staff, can develop those detailed schedules that you need to look at. And so if it's at the 7.1 where we're recommending or the 7.1 mil increase, then we will provide the information that you're asking about and other data points based on that that scenario. If it's the scenario that's a 0 mil increase that the committee pushes forward to the board, then it'll be a separate set of data points. So what you're asking for, you'll get, but it depends on when the committee lands on an initial position for FY24 budget.
Well, I guess the other part of that question is you're looking at those two different millage scenarios, but and these cuts, but what does it mean if we stabilize this district and that we really have the programs and people in place with teachers being paid well? What does that budget look like? I know we always trying to look for the cuts, but this system has not done what it needs to do for a long, long time. I've been watching it for 40 years, and we can cut and we can cut out things, and then we can just continue to not see the growth that this system or the quality of education that this community deserves. And that's a concern that I have. It's time, in my view, for us to do the best thing to move forward, that we have a quality education system that serves all of our students.
And I understand your statement, and I take it to heart. But when I look at what the committee's responsibility is at this point, what the staff's responsibility at this point is to work in reality. And that's what are the real numbers? What are the projections? How strong are the projections? How strong staff feels? I mean, I think a lot of this discussion will come up once we get the final budget. I think that's why I think we're working really hard to give a foundation started right now, so that for the first time you can have something in your hands. You're not getting it a week out from when we have to, pass it, because I think these are hard questions to look at once you start looking at the full budget. But when we look at what we're talking about right now, it's mainly the staffing as requested by the principals, the additional staffing, holding on to what we have. I think it was well stated that we have a lot of a lot of positions out there that aren't full, that we want to fill. And if we fill them, we're going to have a major, we're going to have to rethink some things in the future. We want to fill them. I mean, we obviously know what we need and what we need to fill, but we've got to take that into consideration. The second thing is, I know Mount Pleasant finalized their budget and announced today that we're looking at a 10% increase across the river. I don't know what North Charleston and the Charleston's talking about. I don't know what the county's talking about. I know they're talking about an increase, but we haven't heard about it. But I know that doesn't really. It's just something to take into consideration when we look at these millage rate increases on our part, because homeowners and second homeowners and businesses are going to get hit by everybody. We all know that. So it is something that we have to think about when we move forward. Correct. But what I think to answering that, Dr. Temple, is to really looking, and it's one of the things I know we kind of glaze through it as to what is the real impact. And I appreciate it that you've laid out showing what the impact on a personal property on 10,000 is. We know we have to invest into our education. It's just, I don't know anybody that's going to argue that one, especially somebody who's got kids, and even somebody like myself when I'm playing my grandkids. So I get that. And I do think even though some people say it's nominal, the 2-point reduction on our debt service millage, that affects all Charleston County taxpayers. I mean, all homeowners, and car owners, boat owners, everybody. Shall we move on to the debt service? Fun.
Yes. So when we brought this before Audit and Finance Committee on May 2nd, we were asking to maintain millage at 28 mills. And since then, having more conversations with Audit and Finance Committee, as well as board members and as well as PFM Group, our financial advisors, we realized that we can reduce this to 26 mills and cover our short-term and our long-term debt by using the sinking fund balance. If you'll notice under the FY23 budget, we had budgeted to end sinking fund balance around 29.7. And we actually are going to, it says actual, that should say projected sinking fund balance through June 30th, but we're projecting to end around 27 million. And what you don't want to do is continue to build a debt sinking fund balance like this. You want to use your millage that you've asked for and that what the county has taxed on. And so between using this balance as well as reducing the millage, we'll be able to continue to pay our debt service for FY24, 25, and it looks like mostly into 26. We'll need to reevaluate it next year just to make sure that we can continue to do this. But the way that it's looking now, we wanted to take advantage of this and make this recommendation. The only thing that has changed on this budget summary is the ad valorem taxes. And so with the two mil reduction, we're looking at ad valorem taxes of around 127 million. All the other line items have not changed and neither have the expenditures. And even though we're budgeting to end FY24 with a sinking fund balance of 30 million, that number will be lower. We will make sure that we try to use $5 million each year as we move forward to get that number down, along with balancing that with the 2 mil reduction.
And Ms. Carlin, I still think it'd be very helpful before the board meeting and to get up on board docs, a sheet that lays out the last 10 years and the millage increases that we've, have had, so that everybody understands exactly, what we're looking at and what the history has been.
On both sides.
It's in the budget book, but we can definitely post it separately so that you can see it.
Yeah, I think that really would help.
Okay.
Knowing how thick the budget was going to be.
Okay. So if there are no other questions on the debt service piece, I can talk about next steps.
Please.
Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, so today's May 11th. It's our intent to get a recommended or a vote from Audit and Finance Committee so that we can move forward with the first reading of the FY24 budget. We keep hearing from board members, they want to see something. And so we need this piece to happen so that we can start working on the first reading book to start laying out some things for you to see so that we can start answering some questions and make some solid decisions moving forward. And so if we can get a recommendation today, it is our commitment that we will have in your hands the first reading of the FY24 budget book by next week on May 18th. We'll have it delivered to your homes by our courier service. And then after that, we will have on May 22nd, we'll have the first reading of the FY24 budget presentation and a board vote. I'm sure there'll be some discussions going on in between that with with emails and questions and answerings, things like that, which I encourage so that we can be successful on May 22nd with a board vote. And then on June 7th, we'll come back to the Audit and Finance Committee and we will ask them to vote on a second reading of the FY24 budget. On June 12th, we'll provide a FY24 budget update at the Committee of the Whole. And then the week of June 19th, we haven't landed on a date yet, but we will have the public hearing of the second reading of the FY24 budget. And then on June 26th, we'll have the second reading of the budget presentation and have another presentation and the board adopt a budget. So that on July 1st, we are ready to go and we have a budget in place.
Can we go to the June 19th public hearing? Can you describe that as to how you have previously handled that?
Well, we've previously handled it the same day as the second reading of the budget, but we were just hesitant. I know, we're very hesitant to do that. And so we want to give the public hearing, we want to present that a week in advance. What we do is we post it in newspapers, social media, different, not only Post and Courier, but there's another Charleston magazine that we posted in just to get the word out that we're going to have this public hearing. And it's open to the public. They can come and ask questions about the budget. We'll do a presentation. They can ask questions. We'll set up a CFO at charleston.k12.se.us email address. So if there's something they see, even from these meetings that they want to know more about, they can email us. So that's pretty much it. It's just a public hearing for.
So it'd be here at 75 Calhoun.
Mhm. Yes.
So will people be able to?
Dr. Campbell, please. You're getting your exercise. It's my duty.
Steps. Well, I'm just wondering, with the public hearing, I'm thinking like a one-shot deal. What if people can't be there? So, or what if they physically can't come down here to ask questions? Will they be able to Zoom in their questions, or will they be able to submit questions ahead of time? Or it just always seems to me that having just, at such and such a date, at such and such a time, that's the public hearing. And, people have lives. They can't always schedule everything around. So just, how can we open that up a little bit?
Well, so as Ms. Carlin said, we will have an email account and so what we can do by the 22nd of May, which is the first reading of the budget, we will have landed on a specific date for the public hearing of the week of the 19th. And then, so we will publish that, we will announce that date. And then we can also, at the same time on the 22nd, publish the email account where questions can come in. And then once we post the notice in the various publications, the Post and Courier, others, then we can also indicate what that email account is for questions.
Any further questions from the committee or board members present regarding the next steps? So does that conclude the staff's presentation of the first?
Yes, sir, it does. Thank you.
That concludes the staff's presentation of the first reading of the F24 budget. The recommended action, and I will make the motion to approve the first reading of the F24 budget using a 7.1 mil increase. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, I'll open it. The tables are open to discussion by the committee. Are there any?
I guess I'll jump in with two comments. One, well, first, I appreciate all the effort and all that the staff has gone through to put together all the analysis. It's super helpful and greatly appreciated. And I know how much work it is, or I don't, but I can anticipate, I can guess how much work it is. But my first comment is that my understanding of the core of purpose of this committee is to support the larger school board's effort to exercise its responsibility for the financial health of the school district. And a lot of the work that's happened, which is to create 3-year projections and to do this analysis, is very helpful. But I am concerned about a 3-year projection that relies in part on sort of unidentified savings to get to a balance between the revenues and expenses. And so that's one of my concerns, is that if you go back to the Moody's report that indicated why we have a good credit rating, but again, the first consideration they said what would cause us to be downgraded, it was if we had a multi-year period of sustained declining fund balances. And so I think my personal perspective is that should be our number one priority from this committee's perspective, is to make sure that we don't have multi-year declining fund balances. So that's the core of my point. My second point, it's the only other point I have, is that aside from making sure we have revenues and expenses that are going to roughly offset each other over the next 3 years, I think we have 4 areas of financial concern or risk to us. One is we do have the risk of rising interest rates over subsequent years. And I know the debt that we have that we've already issued is fixed, and so that can't increase by itself. But when each of those maturities occurs and we have to refi, we have the risk right now of paying a higher rate. And so that's a hidden risk to our cost structure. Second concern I have is that we always have a perpetual, on the capital side, we always have a deferred maintenance bucket that we seem to never quite be willing to fully fund. And so I worry about that as a hidden cost creep to our cost structure. And then third and fourth, and maybe these are the most important, but our compensation for our teachers and for our staff as well have not kept up with market. And that's evidenced by the fact that we've had so many unfilled positions. And so so I have that as a concern as well. So I'll leave it at that, but it seems to me that, and I know the staff's doing everything they can to try to balance competing perspectives, but it seems to me that we should have a millage increase that supports those cost structure elements that are inherent in our district. I've probably said enough.
Any other staff members like to comment? I mean, any other committee members like to comment?
I got a question, Mr. Griffin. So would you suggest having a higher millage increase than the 7.1?
I would have a millage increase that gets us to a balance without having unidentified. Yes. So yes, I would.
And I think, my opinion is that we need to start somewhere. I mean, this is just a recommendation. I think staff's worked very hard in setting the support in this recommendation in this millage increase. It's obviously up to the board to decide once they have the full picture, once they have the budget in front of them, to decide what, if any, millage increase is going to be there. But we have to start somewhere. And based upon what I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, that even if we gave the teachers just 2,500, which I don't think is reasonable, we're still going to need a millage increase, to even come close to trying to keep this budget balanced and take into account some of the well-set stated points on, the variances and risks that we're stepping forward. And the last thing we want to do is lose that Moody's rating. I know there's going to be a lot of questions as to whether it's enough or not. I don't think that's our determination. And I think a lot of work's been done. And I think it's more important right now to set a basis to get to the board, from what I understand, probably one of the first times, and I appreciate the hard work you're going to have to do, something to work with. And that requires everything. Any further questions or comments? And I'd like to take a vote. A voice vote.
Aye.
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 Aye. Delma, did she join us? I didn't see her. So the motion passes unanimously. That being it, our next upcoming meeting is set for June 7th. I appreciate staff for accommodating Mr. Calhoun and myself. I look forward to it. I look forward to receiving the book. Calhoun's looking, and he likes to read.
Yes.
With that being said, I'd like to have a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Second,
Motion to adjourn meeting.
you adjourn the meeting. Yes. We